Example, given the explicit formula for the arithmetic sequence, find the first 5 terms and the term named in the problem. So as you can see, we have 2 sequences given, and both the 2 sequences are given with explicit formula. So we need to use these formulas that are given in the question, and we also need to find these terms. So what I'm going to do a partitioning over here so that we can use this space for problem A and this space for problem B. So let's talk about first problem A. So as you can see, it is given that an is equal to negative 12 plus 6n. And what I need to do, I need to find the first 5 terms. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take n equals to 1, and when I take n equals to 1, I have my first term, which is a1, that is equal to negative 12 plus 6 times 1. And as we know, 6 times 1 is 6, so I will write negative 12 plus 6, and negative 12 plus 6 is basically negative 6. So my first term is basically negative 6. Now let's talk about the second term. So I will write n equals to 2. So a2 will be my second term, and I will write negative 12 plus 6 times 2, and 6 times 2 is basically 12. So I will write negative 12 plus 12, and negative 12 plus 12 is basically 0. Now let's write the third term. So I will take n equals to 3, and if I take n equals to 3, I will write a3, that is equal to negative 12 plus 6 times 3, and 6 times 3 is basically 18. So I will write negative 12 plus 18, which is basically 6, a positive 6, I should say. Now let's write the fourth term. So I will write n is equal to 4, and if n equals to 4, I will write a4, which is equal to negative 12 plus 6 times 4, and 6 times 4 is basically 24. So I will write negative 12 plus 24, which is basically positive 12. And my fifth term is basically n is equal to 5, and I will write a5 is equal to negative 12 plus 6 times 5, and we know that 6 times 5 is basically 30. So I will write negative 12 plus 30, which is basically 18. Now it's time for us to find the 35th term. So I will write a35 is equal to negative 12 plus 6 times 35. We know that 6 times 35 is 210, so I will write negative 12 plus 210. So if I add negative 12 and 210, I will get 198. So as you can see, my answer is basically, my first 5 terms are basically negative 6, 0, 6, 12, and 18. And if I keep going, I will get my 35th term, which is basically 198. So this is basically my sequence for the arithmetic by using this explicit formula, which is right here. Now let's try to solve this question. So as you can see, it is given that an, which is my explicit formula, is equal to 100 minus 3n. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to find the first 5 terms. So I will write n is equal to 1, and when n is equal to 1, I have my first term, which is a1, is equal to 100 minus 3 times 1, and we know that 3 times 1 is basically 3. So I will write 100 minus 3, which is basically 97. Now let's take n is equal to 2, and if I take n equals to 2, I will write a2, which is basically 100 minus 3 times 2, and 3 times 2 is basically 6, so I will write 100 minus 6, which is basically 94. Now let's find the third term. So I will write n is equal to 3. So I have a3, which is basically 100 minus 3 times n, because I have 3n. So 3 times n is basically 3 times 3, which is basically 100 minus 9, because 3 times 3 is 9. So if I subtract 9 out of 100, I will get 91. And 91 is my third term. Now let's find the fourth term. So if I take n is equal to 4, I will write a4 is equal to 100 minus 3 times 4, and 3 times 4 is basically 12. So I will write 100 minus 12, which is basically 88. And what I'm basically doing, I'm substituting the value of n in this equation right here. So let me highlight this equation. Now let's find the fifth term. So I will write n is equal to 5, and we have a5, which is basically 100 minus 3 times 5, and we know that 3 times 5 is 15. So I will write 100 minus 15, and 100 minus 15 is basically 85. Now it's time for us to find the a22. So I will write a22 is basically 100 minus 3 times 22, because my n is now 22. So 3 times 22 is basically 66. So I will write 100 minus 66, and 100 minus 66 is basically 34. So if I use all these terms and write the sequence, I will write my answer as, let's first write the first 5 terms. So my first 5 terms are basically 97, 94, 91, 88, 85, and then it keeps going, and my 22nd term is basically 34. And this is my arithmetic sequence from this explicit formula. And this is how we'll find the arithmetic sequence using any explicit formula.